Welcome back to your channel Leo Storyland. Here we uncover a real Reddit story. If you liked my video, please like, share, subscribe.
My name is Nadine, and I'm 30 years old. Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' house was supposed to be simple this year, but nothing about my family has ever been simple. Not since my sister Brielle decided that anything I loved automatically became something she wanted. The table was set with the same white tablecloth my mother used every year, the turkey golden and steaming in the center, the pies lined up on the counter behind us, and every seat filled except one, because my fiancé Desmond was running 15 minutes late from picking up his mother from the airport. I remember thinking, in that last quiet moment before everything fell apart, that this might actually be a peaceful holiday. It started small, the way these things always do in my family. My mother asked when Desmond and I were setting a wedding date, and before I could answer, Brielle laughed and said maybe I should wait, maybe things would change. I asked what she meant, and she just smiled that smile she's had since we were kids, the one that means she already knows something I don't. My father cleared his throat and changed the subject to football, the way he always does when the air in the room gets thick. I let it go. I told myself I was imagining things. Then my mother set down her fork and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen since I was 17 and came home past curfew. She said it was time I did something generous for once in my life, something for my sister, who had been struggling, who had been alone, who deserved a chance at happiness too. I asked her what she was talking about, and she said the words so casually, like she was asking me to pass the potatoes. She wanted me to end my engagement so Brielle could be with Desmond. I laughed, actually laughed, because I thought it was a joke, a cruel one, but a joke. Nobody else laughed. My father stared at his plate. My Aunt Rosalind suddenly found her wine glass fascinating. And Brielle just leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, watching me like she was waiting for a show to start. I said no. I said it clearly, calmly, the way you'd explain something to a child who wasn't listening. I said Desmond was my fiancé, that we had been together for 3 years, that this wasn't a toy to hand over, because someone wanted it. My mother's face hardened. She said I was being selfish, that I always put myself first, that Brielle had sacrificed things for this family that I never had to. I asked what exactly Brielle had sacrificed by dating men who left her within months, but before I finished the sentence, Brielle's voice cut through the room, sharp and satisfied. She said, "Stop being stubborn. He always wanted me. You were just useful." The room went silent except for the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I felt something crack open in my chest, not sadness exactly, more like disbelief curdling into something colder. I asked her what she meant by useful, and she just shrugged, like the truth wasn't worth explaining twice. My mother, instead of defending me, instead of even pausing, told me to apologize to my sister for making a scene. I stood up. I told them this conversation was over, that I wasn't ending anything for anyone, and that if this was what Thanksgiving had become in this house, I would rather eat alone in my car. That was when my mother rose from her chair so fast it scraped against the hardwood floor, and before I understood what was happening, her hand connected with my face. The sound of it was louder than I expected, sharper, the kind of sound that seems to hang in the air long after it happens. My cheek burned. My ears rang. Somewhere at the edge of my vision, I saw my father flinch, saw my aunt's hand fly to her mouth, saw Brielle's smirk widen instead of fade. My mother's chest was heaving, her eyes wild with a fury I didn't recognize, and she raised her hand again. Like once wasn't enough, like she needed to make sure the lesson landed. None of them noticed the front door had opened. None of them heard footsteps in the hallway. My mother's arm was already rising for the second strike when a voice cut through the room, calm but unmistakably firm, a voice that made every head at that table turn at once. It was Desmond, standing in the doorway with his mother's suitcase still in one hand, his eyes locked on my mother's raised palm, his expression unlike anything I had ever seen on his face before. Before my mother could bring her hand down again, he stepped forward, and the words that came out of his mouth next were about to change everything in that house. Everything about how my family saw him, and everything about how they would spend the rest of that Thanksgiving night. Desmond set the suitcase down slowly, deliberately, never taking his eyes off my mother. He said her name once, quiet but firm, and told her that if her hand came down again, it would be the last time she ever stepped foot near me. My mother froze mid-motion, her raised arms suddenly looking foolish in the silence that followed, and for the first time all evening, I watched her realize that someone in this house was finally seeing her clearly. My father stood up so fast his chair tipped backward, stammering something about calming down, about not making things worse. But Desmond wasn't interested in calming anyone down. He walked further into the dining room, past the turkey no one would finish, past my Aunt Rosalind who had gone completely still, and stopped beside my chair. He looked at the red mark blooming across my cheek, and something in his jaw tightened in a way I had never seen before. Then he turned to my sister. He asked Brielle to repeat what she'd said. She hesitated, arms still crossed, but the smirk was gone now, replaced by something closer to nerves. He asked again, slower this time, and she muttered that it didn't matter anymore. Desmond said it mattered enough that my mother had struck her own daughter over it, so she could say it again, to his face this time. Brielle's composure cracked. She said she and Desmond had history, that before he ever met me, there had been something between them, feelings that never fully disappeared, at least not on her side. She said she deserved a real chance, that I had simply gotten there first, that it wasn't fair I got to keep something she wanted more. Desmond let her finish. Then he said something that silenced the entire table. He told her that whatever she imagined once existed between them lived only in her head, that he had never given her a reason to believe otherwise, and that mistaking politeness for interest was not a betrayal on my part or an entitlement on hers. He said he had spent 3 years building a life with Nadine, 3 years my mother apparently didn't think meant anything, and that no family dinner, no manufactured guilt, and certainly no slap across my face was going to change that. My mother tried to interject, her voice shaking now, insisting this was a family matter, that Desmond didn't understand the sacrifices Brielle had made. Desmond turned to her calmly and asked what sacrifices exactly justified striking her own daughter twice at a holiday dinner. My mother had no answer. My father stayed silent, staring at the tablecloth like it might offer him some kind of escape. I found my voice then steadier than I expected. I told my mother that for years I had shrunk myself around Brielle's jealousy, had apologized for things I never did wrong, had let this family convince me that keeping the peace mattered more than being treated with basic respect. I said that ended tonight. I said I would not be handing my fiancé, my future, or one more piece of myself over to someone who called me useful like I was a tool she'd finished with. My Aunt Rosalind, quiet the entire evening, finally spoke up. She said she had watched this pattern for years. Brielle taking, our mother excusing it, me absorbing the cost, and she was ashamed she had never said anything before. Her words seemed to loosen something in the room, like permission for the truth to finally breathe. My mother's anger drained into something smaller, something that looked almost like fear of losing control of a room she had always dominated. She reached for my arm, her voice softer now, asking me not to make this bigger than it needed to be, asking me to just sit down and finish dinner like a family. I looked at her hand on my arm, then at the mark still stinging on my cheek, and I gently stepped back. I told her that families don't raise their hands against each other and call it love, and that I wouldn't be sitting back down at a table where my pain was treated as an inconvenience. Desmond picked up my coat from the back of the chair and held it out for me without a word. My father finally spoke, his voice small, asking if we were really leaving. I told him yes, and that maybe when this family learned what respect actually looked like, we would talk again. Brielle called out as we reached the door, her voice cracking, saying she didn't mean for it to go this far. I turned back just once and told her that intentions don't undo actions, and that maybe it was time she built something of her own instead of reaching for what was mine. My mother stood frozen by the table, the raised hand that started all of this now hanging useless at her side, finally understanding that some lines, once crossed, cannot be walked back with an apology over dessert. Desmond and I walked out into the cold night air together, my hand in his, the porch light casting long shadows behind us as the front door clicked shut on a house that no longer felt like home. Whatever came next, whatever conversations or apologies or silence followed in the days ahead, I knew one thing for certain: sitting